Hey folks, welcome back to, it's Iconic with Kanthan and Chris, my co-host Kanthan Pillay in South Africa. I'm here in Pennsylvania. Kanthan, we spoke a few weeks back and, it's been such a slow news cycle. I don't know what we're going to talk about today. Anything you want to talk about?
It feels like a couple of years have gone by in the past 2 weeks. There's pretty much a blinding speed at which this stuff is happening. What a time to be alive.
I mean, seriously, how can a 78-year-old move this damn fast?
I'm constantly impressed. This guy has given more press conferences in 2 weeks than he has in his entire first term, as well as Joe Biden's entire term.
Yeah, you put the two of them together, and it's still only a quarter of what he's done since he came in office this time. I mean, the word alacrity doesn't describe Donald Trump's pace. I mean, look, Kanthan, I've been covering what he's been doing, plus the impact on South Africa, the actions of South Africa. I'm working 15, 18 hours a day for no pay here, man. I'm not getting any sleep. I'm getting cat naps here and there because I got to keep up with Trump.
Well, the trick really is to make sure that you're using podcasts when you're driving. Now, you probably don't do that much driving. I still have to do a school run every day, and it's like a 40K drive to the school, and that's okay because I lap up podcasts along the way. And guess what? My kids have actually started getting into the stuff as well.
Into what? Into the podcast?
Yeah, very much so.
Oh, okay.
And there's
I hope it's not me when I'm using my potty mouth.
No, I'm very careful in terms of what I end up using, but my 17-year-old, for example, has become a great fan of Megyn Kelly.
Oh, really? Okay. I'm still getting over my divorce with Megyn Kelly. I mean, she irritated me in the 2016 election, her behavior in that debate, and I've never quite forgiven her for that. But I mean, I'm coming around. I'm starting to listen to her and buy into that. But yeah, no, I could see why people be a fan. She's been very consistent as conservative of late. And so I could see why your kids would find her interesting. She's got.
Well, if you want to go back to 2016, Chris, take the view that lots of people. So Musk, for example, was very much on Team Democrat at the time.
Yeah.
And you've got Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, all of these people who've now swung complete 180 and have come across to the party of common sense, as Trump keeps referring to it. And, perhaps that's the determining factor. It becomes really difficult to sit on the other side and find a way to support it when, you're deporting Venezuelan gangsters who've actually been committing horrendous crimes in the U.S. and you have a judge that says, no, you're not allowed to deport them. It's crazy stuff that's going on in that country of yours.
Yeah, it is. It just shows you the out-of-control judicial system. Look, the branches are supposed to be co-equal, and there's supposed to be checks and balances, but not cancellations. They don't have the ability to cancel. The only cancellation comes in the override of a veto. Congress can override the president's veto, but beyond that, the courts can declare something unconstitutional, but they can't just make these decisions whole cloth like they're doing. It's a bit out of control. As far as Megyn Kelly, my issue was less that she was opposed to Donald Trump. I don't have a problem with that. He wasn't my candidate in 2016. I'm a Ted Cruz guy. That's who I was for in 2016. My issue was she was in charge of a debate, and the way she behaved in that debate was very unprofessional. And as a journalist, I never forgave her for that. But I'm coming around. I'm coming around to her now. But you're right. It's crazy. We can't even deport murderers and rapists and pedos. We can't even send them back. Look, what is this? So we have to pay into perpetuity to keep in prison? Oh, no, we just let them on the streets. 16,500 convicted murderers amongst that 650,000 convicted felons who are illegal aliens who are in this country. And we have people opposing getting rid of them? What planet are these people living on?
Well, from my side, sitting across in South Africa, I envy the crime rate that you have in the U.S. because this stuff is all relative, Chris. Come on, go with the flow.
Fair point. Someone responded to, I posted something because I was doing a backup buddy for that farmer who was attacked this weekend. I don't usually post stuff like that, but I posted, and of course the social media clowns and attacks came out. But the guy came out and says, "Your race," and this, that, and the other. And I wrote back, dude, I don't know what race you're part of, but I'm part of the human race, and your callous disregard for a fellow Homo sapien tells me you must be from some other race that we don't know.
So is this your way of saying that you're no longer a Neanderthal? I think that was the
the
catchphrase.
Yeah, no. Definitely got Neanderthal DNA in it, as almost every human being does. I mean, that's the dirty little secret no one wants to admit to. It's a smaller amount. It's amazing how traces of Neanderthal DNA can still be found in our genome when we're talking about intermixing that's at least 30, 40,000 years ago. It's amazing that stuff can continue. I'm gonna get an attack here from the people who pull the Bible out now. Okay, relax, folks. I'm not attacking anybody's faith. I'm just talking about DNA. Okay, yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. So hey, how about that dude? That pretty cool guy. You know, he's very popular in the Western Cape. Ibrahim Rasool. Have you heard about him?
Oh my word! Yes. Yeah. So I've known Ibrahim Rasool pretty much since the 90s. When he was still Premier of the Western Cape. And the single point of annoyance that I always had with Ibrahim Rasool was when he saw that the ANC was going to be losing their grip on the Western Cape government. He engineered a merger with the National Party under then leader Martinus van Schalkwyk, and effectively absorbed the National Party into the African National Congress. It's the most bizarre story that you can think of. And they then have the temerity to spend the next 20 years saying that the DA is the party of apartheid, when they literally absorbed the party of apartheid directly into the African National Congress. And you can't make this stuff up. And of course, we have a media that very faithfully parrots this particular line. You know, it's 4 legs good, 2 legs better, 4 legs good, 2 legs better, that kind of stuff.
Well, you know, you mentioned that because when you tell that history, which I've done, people try to say, you don't know anything about South Africa. Yeah, okay, all right, sure, fine, thanks. Yeah, historians of political science don't know anything about other countries. It just never happens. That's why there's so many experts on America from South Africa. But anyway, no, whenever this thing comes up, and I said, look, the antecedent roots of the ANC aren't back to the early part of the 20th century. That's just part of it. The other antecedent roots are the party that brought us apartheid. The National Party is part and parcel of the ANC. No, it's not. Yes, it is. And then you have people know a little bit of history, and they try to use smoke and mirrors. Well. No, the National Party merged with the DA. There was an abortive attempt to merge those two parties in the early part of this century, and it failed. Those people didn't stick, and it was very brief. And those people went to the ANC, and Van Schalkwyk sold his soul for the Ministry of Tourism. That's it. So that's the bottom line. But people forget that the antecedent roots of the ANC are not simply equality and equal rights going back to the early part of the 20th century, but also the heritage of apartheid.
Yes. The interesting thing, of course, is that people are now returning to the referendum where the overwhelming majority of white South Africa voted to end apartheid. And again, that's something else that's been airbrushed out of history quite effectively. And yeah, so there are all of these bits of and pieces. But I think the fundamental lesson that we can draw from this, Chris, is that in this modern world, facts really don't matter.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah. And really, we're at the situation right now where it's going to be the people who most effectively able to mobilize enough of a base to actually get stuff done that are actually going to be in control of how things happen. And, you know, two very opposite ends of the spectrum out here. I'll take the case of AfriForum and Solidariteit, who have been doing a superb job just in terms of being able to mobilize massive numbers of people. I mean, last I heard that they had signed up members at the level of something like 350,000 or something like that. But more crucially, these are paid members who are constantly funneling money in the direction of these organizations, which means that these organizations can't be shut down because, you know, the normal thing would be in this situation that the government would go to whoever the political funders were and say, you can't do this or we're going to hurt your business. They can't do it in the case of AfriForum and Solidarity, just simply because the numbers are on their side, and so they've got traction. The opposite end, of course, is you've got the likes of the EFF, you know, who, even though they dropped below 10% in the last elections, they still punch behind, way above their weight in terms of political discourse in the country. And of course, they almost single-handedly continue to drive this entire divisive narrative that has been pretty much tearing the country apart.
That's a fair point, but they have some help. MK is out there to help them with this decisive narrative now, so they're not flying solo. But you're right; they seem to be the party that the media loves to grab a hold of when they're relatively insignificant. And, you know, the one time they had a chance to have the mayorship in the Free State after the 2020 municipal elections, they were voted in because the ANC sided with them, and their mayor candidate was elected, and the party told the mayor to resign and not accept the post because the ANC voted with them. That shows you how serious they are about governance. The one time they had a chance to prove their mettle and show they could do something, they don't want to be shown they could do something. They just want to be on the sidelines and carp to get the money and get the attention, because that's all they're really about.
Well, the numbers do seem to be going down, so there's that. And I strongly suspect that given the particular shenanigans we've had in this country, particularly in terms of the DA's relationship to the entire Trump administration, I suspect that there's going to be a strong uptick in terms of support, particularly for, AfriForum and Solidarity, I think, are going to see a fair uptick in their numbers, which they probably already have. But I also suspect that the Freedom Front Plus is suddenly going to be looking far more attractive to people who normally would never have looked at it.
Well, I think that the Freedom Front Plus is due for a rebound anyway, because what happened in the 2020 municipal elections is a lot of people wanted to send the DA message and switched from DA to Freedom Front Plus, probably a couple 100,000 votes if you look at the numbers, which had a significant boost for them over their previous performance. But then in this last election, they lost votes. The Freedom Front Plus lost that traction at the national level, and if you see it, I think the numbers that probably slid from the Freedom Front Plus back to the DA kept the DA from collapsing further, because the DA likes to run around and say we're the only major party to gain, but they didn't gain in this election. They may have gained percentage, but they lost votes. The only reason they gained percentage is because fewer and fewer people voted, and the ANC cratered. I think it went from 57 to 40%, and that's the 40% who bothered to vote, which is only a portion of the 26 million who are registered to vote, and a small fraction of the 43 million people who are eligible to vote. So if you look at the numbers, it's abysmal for all these parties. The only party that did really well was MK out of the blue, but that's really just bum-hurt ANC RET people, and Zulus who glom onto Jacob Zuma because he's a Zulu. And then the IFP did a modest gain. The IFP actually gained a bit, but they gained a lot in terms of locally in KZN, but that's because people just stopped voting for the ANC. They didn't necessarily switch to IFP. So they gained about 2% nationally, but nobody else gained. Everyone else just kind of floundered. The DA likes to run around and pound their chest. We did so well. Dude, you held serve. That's it. You didn't gain. I mean, if you'd done well, you'd have got 30%, but you didn't get there. You've never gotten there. Your best chance was under Helen Zille, and she doesn't lead the party anymore. And Helen Zille today is not the Helen Zille of 2014. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. I've been having conversations around that, and I strongly suspect it's not that Helen Zille is not the Helen Zille that she was, but I think that her grip on the party is not what it used to be. And
well, that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, and it's a very different thing when you chairperson of the federal caucus versus the leader of the party. But the flip side of that is the purported leader of the party. My word. I don't want to start on this, and let's not turn this into a...
It's not a John bashing session.
Yeah, it's not a John bashing session. And I do think we need to go back to our friend Ibrahim Rasool. And so a couple of interesting things coming out of that. I think the most significant thing, of course, is the very hasty backtracking on the part of the president. You could see him looking positively sheepish when he was giving his responses around, well, we need to have a good relationship with the United States, and we've noted their displeasure, and we'll be engaging through diplomatic channels. And it's a very far cry from the Cyril Ramaphosa.
We will not be bullied.
We will not be bullied, exactly. And he suddenly has very quickly come to the realization that he's actually skating on seriously thin ice. And part of the reason why he's skating on thin ice is that all of the people that I think he would consider to be potential allies, Trump now has direct lines to all of them. So Trump now has open dialogue with Putin. Trump has open dialogue with Modi. Trump has open dialogue with Xi Jinping. Trump has open dialogue with Lula in Brazil. So that's all of the BRIC countries already taken care of. And, let's not talk about North Korea. Trump already has back channels that are in place with the Iranians. And, that's going to be an interesting one. I'm watching that very carefully. But the point is that all of this paper sword rattling that South Africa has been doing has been completely in contrast to what the rest of the world has been doing. I think everyone else has been actually zipping their lips, waiting to see which way things are actually going to shape up. But more to the point, they've all got these individual channels of communication. South Africa is probably the sole exception to the rule. We don't have open channels with the US right now.
No,
And
not at all.
it's unheard of for us not to have that direct channel of communications. Why is it that you have unelected representatives of particular South African communities being able to pitch up and get an audience from people close to the President of the United States, and the South African government doesn't have a clue what's going on? They don't have open channels.
Well,
Now,
even more embarrassing for South African government is their coalition partners do have an open channel. The DA came here. Emma Powell was here. She spoke to all these folks. That's a part of the government national unity, but it was in a DA capacity, not in a government national unity capacity. That's got to be incredibly embarrassing for Ramaphosa and his team.
Yeah, I don't think embarrassment has ever been a point of concern for them, though.
I didn't say it was a concern.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to be concerned about being embarrassed, but you can still be embarrassed.
Yes. Uh-huh. No, I don't think so. I don't think it actually fits into their vocabulary at all. From their perspective, Ramaphosa will stand up and say once again, we need to pull together. And of course, his catchphrase, "I'm shocked." He's quite famous for saying "I'm shocked." Yeah, but so to go back to Rasul, I don't think people have quite got their heads around just what an incredibly groundbreaking move that was on the part of the Trump administration. Because normally what happens in these diplomatic kerfuffles is that you'll have a démarché where basically the ambassador will be summoned and given a dressing down by the State Department in your particular case. The other thing that's likely to then happen is that there will be a request that a range of personnel leave. But for the ambassador of a country to be declared persona non grata and to have a GTFO in the next 72 hours is utterly unprecedented. They didn't even do that to the Russians.
No, they didn't even do it to the Soviets. So usually it's a tit for tat to low-level officials. In fact, I have colleagues who were kicked out of the Soviet Union, or not Soviet, Russia after the Soviet Union, kicked out of Russia on a tit for tat basis. They did nothing wrong, but they just happened to be a military attaché that was there, and that's who they decided to go after as this dispute between Russia and the U.S. would happen. So yeah, that is typically going to happen. But look, I mean, what Rasul did is beyond the pale. It's beyond the norm. I mean, look, yeah, he knows better. He's been a diplomat in Washington when Obama was here for 5 years. He knows how the game works.
Well, let me just correct you on that point. He's had a diplomatic posting in Washington, but to suggest for a second that actually involves real diplomacy, which involves building relationships with the administration of the day, maintaining those relationships, but at the same time, looking at the possibility that there'll be a new administration coming in, and then building relationships with the incoming administration as well. Now, you could see that the Indians are absolutely brilliant at this. Jaishankar had excellent relationships with the first Trump administration. They very quickly pivoted and established a fairly solid footing in terms of the Biden regime. They were not as closely aligned with the Biden regime on a number of issues, but there certainly was an ongoing sense of fairly intense behind-the-scenes diplomatic negotiations on a range of things. South Africa has not had anything to show for any of this. There's been no process of negotiating up front. Going back to the Biden era, that hey guys, AGOA is coming up for expiry. Can we talk about renewing it? Can we talk about reshaping it? Because we've got some ideas in terms of what we can be doing in terms of the motor vehicle front, the agricultural produce front. Maybe we want to have better access in terms of our wines getting across to larger parts of the U.S. markets, and in exchange for that, maybe we'll lift some of the duties that we've got on U.S. poultry, as an example. So there's a whole range of things that could have been done. None of this stuff has actually happened. And of course, in the process, the U.S. used to be one of our biggest trading partners. It's now slipped down behind, well, China is currently number one. But again, this is a point that people tend to forget. China is South Africa's biggest trading partner, but it's mainly one-way trade. We are net importers.
And it's not up the value chain. It's raw materials. You're not producing BMW parts or
correct
mechanical
That's right.
things.
Yeah.
So when you produce those things domestically, you move up the value chain. You get more of the value, you reproduce more wealth. Whereas you just ship raw materials and commodities to the country, you're getting a price, and it swings wildly with commodity prices. So one time it's great, another time it's terrible. It's just not a good basis for a healthy economy to be based on commodities.
So, basically what I'm saying is that Rasool has been a complete and utter disaster in his tenure out there, just simply on the basis that he has nothing to show for it. Because when you have a diplomatic posting, come back and allow your president to then have a song and dance when he delivers a State of the Nation address to say that, our ties with the United States have grown. By all means, keep your ties going with Russia, keep your ties going with China, because we are a free and independent country, and we should be able to have those bilateral ties that, as long as they're in the country's interest. But when you don't have anything to actually sing about, that is an indication that the person that has been appointed to do the job is just simply not up to snuff.
Well, I'd agree 100%. I want to come back to this in a second, but I just want to talk about India very quickly. We'll discuss India later on if you want. But I would argue that, not that you argued the contrary, but I would argue for the audience that India's foreign policy vis-a-vis the U.S. has been pretty clever since George Walker Bush's time frame. Bush worked on, with the Indian government, working on nuclear technology for power plants for India. And India moved out of that non-aligned movement nonsense from the 60s and 70s and modernized and updated their foreign policy and kind of opened up in the U.S. And since then, things have gotten, closer in many respects. Modi, that guy, he's a pretty smart guy. I got to tell you, I don't know, anecdotal story here, Kanthan. So during the BRICS summit in South Africa, I was there as an accredited journalist, and I had lunch with Mark Oppenheimer at the Santon Sun just across the street. And we were coming down after finishing having our lunch there. And a whole crowd of people, hundreds, probably a few thousand Indian South Africans were hanging out there. And we're like, what's going on here? Well, must be Modi. And in comes Modi. And almost shoulder to shoulder, we passed Modi and his security detail. But boy, Indian South Africans love that guy. He's very popular with Indian South Africans, I got to tell you.
Well, did you see when Modi pitched up at that rally with Trump? I think it was it Texas? I don't remember exactly, but you had a stadium that was full. Imagine a rally in the U.S. where you have a foreign leader pitching up, and it's a 100,000-seater stadium that was filled by people from the Indian diaspora who came out there, and of course Trump, to his credit, then took a walk through the crowds with Modi.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Leaving his security detail behind. And in fact, Modi has spoken about that as well. That he said that he developed huge respect for Trump at that point because, he just suggested to the guy, "Why don't we take a walk?" And Trump said, "Sure, let's do it." And they got up and did it.
And it was smart. Yeah. It was just smart of these guys. So the Rasool thing, you're right. He was here for 5 years and didn't really accomplish anything. But when Rasool was announced as an appointment late last year, I just shook my head like, what? Are you thinking this thing through? You're going to send Ibrahim Rasool to the U.S. to be the ambassador. We know that Trump's going to be the next president, and you're going to send this guy there? That doesn't make any sense. He's on record as a Trump hater. He said evil things about America. I don't know why you would do that. It's the antithesis of diplomacy. It's an own goal. And here we go. Ibrahim Rasool didn't wait long to prove me right. He made an own goal. This was beyond the pale. It was. Look, I've worked in embassies all over Africa and all over the Middle East and Europe, and I've been assigned to 8 embassies in Africa, and you can say these things in private. You can have these kind. Look, Kanthan, I've heard the most vile and disgusting things said about my country, which are untrue, by African diplomats in a private setting in diplomatic circles. But you don't do this in public. You don't put this out there. You certainly don't embarrass your host country. No matter, even if it's true, you don't do it. It's just not good form. And it really cut against grain. And to see South African media and some South African politicians come out and try to defend it, it's nauseating because now there are some calm voices in the mix, and a little bit encouraging sign I thought is that the Office of the Presidency on Saturday morning after they became aware of this, because I was aware of it like 15 minutes after it happened. I was already covering it. But when they became aware of it, because you guys are 6 hours ahead, the Office of the Presidency, Mongwenya, put out a statement saying this is unfortunate. Let's have all the stakeholders, be calm. Let's work through this. I would have gone a step further if I was governor of South Africa. I would have said that Ibrahim Rasool does not speak on behalf of the United States or of the South African government. This was said in his private capacity, not in official capacity. We're recalling him, and he will be censured for his conduct. We'll be sending a new ambassador designate to Washington at our earliest convenience. That's what I would have said. But what they did was okay. And then since then, senior members of the government have intimated to some of the media, like Times Live, that we can't defend this. I mean, he went too far. And they're making the distinction I made. This was in his personal capacity, not as ambassador. That's the smart diplomatic thing to do. But the fact that Rasool ever came here is an own goal of epic. It shows you just how arrogant and disconnected from reality the South African government is. The South African government keeps playing to a domestic audience. We will not be bullied. Who do you think was listening to that? You're just poking the bear. Trump has done nothing to punish South Africa. And he's punished us. He's aggressive. He's done this. He's sanctioned us. Professor Khuz from Stellenbosch, he's sanctioned South Africa. There's no sanctions. Don't lie to people. All that's happened is Trump has suspended foreign aid, which he did for the entire world on January 20th. And then South Africa had to complain about it and keep drawing attention. Oh, over here. Hey, you're picking us. Dude, who are you? We're not picking on you. Everybody lost their aid. Well, now it's gone for good because you poked the bear. It's this navel-gazing inability to distinguish between domestic and international relations. I mean, you can play that crap for a domestic audience in South Africa, but look, the race card has expired, Kanthan. In D.C., the race card don't work anymore. It ain't going to work. It may work with guilty white liberals in South Africa, but it ain't working in America. Those days are over, at least for the foreseeable future.
Certainly up until the days of the Biden regime, the race card still had great traction. And, even after Obama was no longer president, he came down to South Africa to deliver the Nelson Mandela lecture to a packed stadium up here in Johannesburg. And, of course, he continued banging on the race card drum. And really, the only point at which the suddenly has been tossed out was when Trump came into power. Because the entire message that the Trump administration has been pushing all the way through has been meritocracy. And they really don't give a damn what happens to be your race. They don't care who you happen to be sleeping with. And, people were suddenly surprised at the point at which they discover that your Treasury Secretary is gay.
Yeah, they didn't know that.
Well, they didn't, but they said, well, why didn't... But I said, why does it matter?
Exactly.
He's the best guy for the job. He's been hired on that basis. He has not been hired because of who his preferences are in the bedroom. And that's the thing that you guys actually are not getting. Yep. Because when you have a society that's hiring the best people for the job, that's when things actually work. I mean, we had a time in South Africa where Tony Leon, after he stepped down as leader of the Democratic Alliance, had diplomatic postings.
He went to Argentina.
Yes, and did a very reasonable job out there. And, as one would actually expect. We've had people from the IFP who went across as ambassadors as well. And all of this is the way in which a country should actually be conducting itself. The point around an ambassador is not to make policy. The point around the ambassador is to smile, it's to kiss babies, it's to shake hands, it's to make introductions, and to facilitate the actual negotiation to be done by the people who have boots on the ground. So at the point at which you have a delegation from South Africa who wants to go across and talk about getting more agricultural produce into the country, that's the point at which the ambassador has to step up. And the ambassador is the person who would normally be introducing the Minister of Agriculture to all of the significant people in the U.S., so that the Minister of Agriculture doesn't have to take notes. The ambassador says, this is the governor of the state of Louisiana, who have a fondness for South African wines and has suggested that there should be a conversation going on. Nobody thinks along these lines. And it goes back to something that you said earlier in this conversation, when you were making reference to to India throwing away all of the idea behind, the non-aligned group. Now, it was a very different world back then in the 1970s. Because effectively you had the First World and the Second World, and people forget that the Second World was actually the Soviet bloc and all of their entourage, and everyone else was the Third World. And the everyone else, basically, if you crammed all of their economies together, they were almost non-existent compared to the First World and Second World. And so at the time, the idea around the non-aligned movement was to try and build commonality and see whether there was any way that they could pool resources and look for better things. The shift, of course, came for India at the point at which protectionist economies and trying to stifle entrepreneurship inside their country was absolutely stupid. And it started with Manmohan Singh, who was a Congress prime minister, who was the first person to begin unlocking the Indian economy. And then Modi came in and, relatively speaking, drove a truck through all of the regulations that had been holding that economy captive. And the result, of course, is that India is now third biggest economy in the world.
Yep.
And more importantly, is posting bigger percentage GDP growth per capita than any of the other players in the large economies. And the point that Modi has actually realized is that the way in which you get to be at that point is by striking the best possible deal with every party. So Modi has brilliant relationships with the United States. He's got brilliant relationships with Russia. Modi actually managed to effectively carve out détente with the Chinese. There's long unresolved issues.
Oh, with the border,
with China. That goes back to the fact that China in 1962 invaded India and took significant portions of what they incorporated to Tibet, including, by the way, I must tell you, the most holy site for Hinduism, which is Mount Kailash, which is meant to be the abode of Lord Shiva. And it's a sore point for India that this territory has been under Chinese control now for just over 60 years. But at the same time, Modi has managed to structure a détente in the interests of trade. Now, all it would take is for a South African leader to be doing exactly that, acting in the best interests of the people of this country. And not, spending another, 37 million now being shipped off to fund the ICG case against Israel. And, how does that benefit any single South African?
It doesn't. How does renaming Santon Tribe benefit any South African after a Palestinian terrorist? But yeah, look, the difference here, I think, is that we can make the argument in the case of both of these folks, Donald Trump and Modi. Both are leaders, actual leaders, and they're disruptive leaders. They're willing to take the steps to make the change, to make things better. And I think it plays out. I mean, people are attacking Trump because, he's isolationist, because he's got tariffs. It's not about isolationism. It's about a reasonable deal. It's about, level playing field. So when people threaten U.S. interests, Trump threatens tariffs, and it works. The president of Colombia learned that very fast.
Well, let me give you some perspective. Let me give you some perspective on this very thing. Right now, we have Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota, a range of them manufacturing motor vehicles in South Africa. And those motor vehicles, if they ship to the United States, they enter the United States duty-free.
Correct.
If we are importing cars into this country from pretty much any part of the world, including the U.S., there's a 100% tariff that gets put onto them.
Exactly. And we're not punishing you. We should.
Exactly. And so there's no reciprocity in place there. And really what Trump has been saying is that we're very happy to have free trade if you're giving us free trade.
Yep.
But if you're not, we want reciprocity.
But the press don't report it that way. They report Trump as being...
No, but the press don't understand it.
Of course they don't. And I don't think they want to.
Mm-hmm. They have a fundamental inability to grasp the basic economics of what has been happening around this stuff. There was almost a sense of glee last week at the point at which the S&P 500 took its biggest hit in a number of years. And you could see this cackling coming from the chattering classes and the supposed business media, kind of rubbing their hands together in delight and saying, "Look, Trump is messing it up." And the thing that I've been trying to explain to a lot of these idiots is that one of the reasons why the stock market got to be as high as it did during the Biden era is that Biden just printed absolutely so much money, and that money had to go somewhere. And the money then flowed into the stock market because that was the most sensible thing to be doing with it. And now you have the situation where, because of the fact that the money supply has effectively been choked off, remember that Biden actually printed more money in the 4 years that he was in office than the U.S. had printed in its entire history. Yep. Up until that time.
Overlooked. Well, and that's after we had quantitative easing all those years, which tripled the money supply. No, that most people aren't familiar with the M1, M2, M3 money supply. We've obliterated the value of the dollar. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. That's one reason why, well, that plus the government sucking up all the cash in the economy and crimping the credit markets by deficit spending is why we had such inflation. Those, and then of course, him shocking the energy markets was it's a triple whammy. I mean, look, Biden hit a home run. He hit it three, no strikes, 3 swings, and he knocked it out of the park here with inflation because of the energy markets uncertain, because of burning money we didn't have and borrowing, and then just printing more money. This is a toxic mix, and if it wasn't for the fact that the world's reserve currency, in effect, is the dollar, our economy would have been a complete mess, but somehow we survived. But we got to clean that mess up now.
Well, I think that what has been happening is that Team Trump has largely been cleaning it up. And so we had this spectacular crash in terms of the S&P 500. And then a couple of days later, the inflation figures came out, which were the best that they'd been in months. And it was the first time that it actually reversed. So there'd been a 4-month uptick up until the end of Biden's days. And suddenly you had them dropping down to their lowest level. And guess what? The markets were incredibly happy as a result. And the S&P 500 then proceeded to bounce back up. And we're going to be seeing a lot of this happening. But I also think that people are not understanding a very basic concept. And the concept that they need to get their heads around is that the people that voted for Donald Trump are not people who play the stock market. And so using the stock market as a measure of how well Trump is doing is not the point.
Yeah.
Using the price of eggs is a good measuring point. Using the price of gas, that's a good measuring point. Using the fact that people are going to end up with more money in their pockets as a result of tax reduction. Again, tax cuts. That's going to be, again, swaying the field in favor of Trump. The stock market is going to rebound. I'm very clear about that. And in fact, if I had any spare cash right now, I'd be ramping up on my Tesla shares. But
everyone's freaking out. Everyone's freaking out about the market. I'm like, yeah, go ahead, freak out, man. This is a buying opportunity for me. I'm good to go.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a distinct lack of any sort of awareness around what's actually going on. There's an entire vocabulary that the Trump team has injected into the world that these people are completely unfamiliar with. And it's going to be a very rough ride for them over the next 4 years, really.
No, I agree with you 100%. Let me go back to something we talked about, or you mentioned earlier, and that's I think something that bears mentioning here. I get so annoyed because the focus with the political left is always the first, oh, the first black, the first trans, the first gay, the first this nonsense, especially talking about people who aren't even the first. I remember when they had a black female astronaut a couple years ago. Oh, the first black astronaut. Well, we called them out and said, no, a black astronaut died in the Challenger in 1986. And that wasn't even the first black astronaut. Oh, the first black female. No, we've had black female astronauts for 27 years. It's just nonsense. But when a conservative government does that, they completely forget it. Rick Grinnell was the first openly gay cabinet member as the director of the Office of National Intelligence in the first Trump administration. Not a fan of Rick Grinnell, by the way, for various reasons. But look at this cabinet. Lisa Stefanik, woman, UN ambassador. Then we've got Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, a woman. Marco Rubio, Hispanic minority, is Secretary of State. the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, a Pacific Islander and a former Democrat and scion of the Kennedy family. Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. is secretary. And we go on from there. The Attorney General is Pam Bondi, a woman. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, a woman. Secretary of Commerce.
Nobody speaks about Cash Patel as the.
Well, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I was saving that for the end. So I'll sum up because I could do this all afternoon. So I'll give you two more. Then we've got Scott Bessent, openly gay, and all we hear about is Pete Buttigieg being daddy mom and him being gay. It's all they talked about the whole time. No one even knew Scott Bessent was gay. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And then, of course, Kash Patel. And all they do is attack him. This guy's radical. This guy's the most qualified guy to be the director of the FBI in 40 years, in my view. You know, Mueller wasn't this qualified. He's an attorney. He's worked in the Defense Department. He's worked in the U.S. Department of Justice. He's worked as a private practicing attorney. He's worked in other elements. Kash Patel is the most. And did you see the video? Did you see the recruiting video that the FBI just did? Oh, it's awesome. Cash is out there wearing.
I have not, actually.
Oh, you got to go find it. He's wearing camouflage. He's got a cap on. And instead of I had two mummies. Instead of that for the ads, Kash Patel's out there, and you've got Black Hawk helicopters from the FBI flying in. They do an insertion. They blow the doors in the building, and there's Kash walking around, carrying. It is awesome. It's we're back, baby. No, look, yeah, exactly. Indian Americans all over the place, and we've got immigrants. The president's married to an immigrant, a naturalized citizen, and one of his right-hand guys is a naturalized citizen, Elon Musk. The list goes on. Immigrants, people of color, women, gays, straights, whatever. It's all here. It's all there. But not once is any of that talked about by any media outlet on the planet. And actually, I don't care if they don't talk about it because it's not germane. It doesn't matter. Best people, best job, merit-based appointments. But all they want to do is attack the administration's racist. That's so tired. That card isn't working here anymore.
I'm very curious as to whether all of that collective wisdom that we've got currently sitting surrounding your government across the pond is going to be able to in any way influence what's happening in this part of the world right now. And I know lots of people are getting quite uptight about this, and they've been saying the U.S. shouldn't be interfering in what we're doing out here. Joel Pollak actually gave a very reasonable interview around what's currently happening in the South African context with Biz News, and he was making the point: no, actually, we want good relationships with South Africa, and we want South Africa to do better. And here's a list of things that South Africa can immediately do that will, in fact, make things better. And I strongly suspect that the ANC right now is so caught up, and I strongly suspect that funding has got a lot to do with it. Because if you look in terms of the welcome that Ursula von der Leyen got when she pitched up fairly recently, and all of the noises that the Europeans have been making to say, don't worry, if USAID has pulled money, we're going to step in to fill the gap. Never mind the fact that they are pretty much going down the path of bankruptcy. The UK, I'm very clear, is in a technical recession already, and that's likely to end up getting far worse. But South Africa is missing the point that there's actually a coming together right now of the rest of the world, even old enemies. And what they are trying to do is to clean up a mess that has been left across several decades in terms of the way in which the world has actually been run. There used to be this phrase, the rules-based order, which was in fact never that, because it was one set of rules for one people and another for others. And the fact is that Trump does have a rules-based order. The simple rule that he has is reciprocity. So you treat us properly, we'll treat you properly. We're not going to meddle with your stuff, but we are expecting that when you're dealing with us, you're doing it on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefit. And if you can do that, we're going to get along fine. Well, South Africa misses this point completely. India gets it. Russia gets it. China gets it. Brazil gets it.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Look, I haven't heard what Pollak has said. I heard he was on Business. I was just interviewed on Business before this for this broadcast about these issues, about Rasul in particular, but a couple other things. Look, South Africa doesn't. That's what I'm saying. They're playing for a domestic audience, not understanding that the rules are changed. There's a new sheriff in town, and I've made suggestions to the South African government. You can stop the bleeding by simply stopping the talking. Stop insulting America. We're not insulting South Africa. And instead of letting lunatics in government run around and attack Joel Pollack, we'll never let that guy come here. We'll kill him if he comes here. We'll burn down the embassy. This is coming from politicians, not just wackadoodles on social media. This is not helpful. And I realize that may not be the party in power, but they are in parliament with you. Pull them aside and say, listen, this is not helpful. This is the impact. You're hurting people. So, my argument has been just to tone down the temperature, but they don't seem to care. And maybe the money's coming from Tehran, or they're doing something on behalf of Tehran. I made that argument when they first came back and suddenly had the money to pay off that lawsuit, and then they had their birthday celebration last year. Where'd that money come from? None of that was reported to the IEC, by the way. That's 150, 170 million rand potentially, and none of it is reported. We don't know because whether they paid the fine or not. It was 102 million. They were the party planners.
Well, we still don't know where the president got all of the cash that was found at Pala Pala.
It came from a Sudanese businessman. He bought those bulls, don't you know, and they left them there. No, but look, my suggestion to them was that's the first place to start. Stop the nonsense. You don't do your State of the Nation address. You're addressing South Africa, and your first statement in it is, "We will not be bullied." Who are you being bullied by? It's supposed to be addressed to South Africa, not addressed to Donald Trump, and that's just insulting. That's the first step. The second step here is to sit down and talk to us. Look. I've run through a list of grievances. I don't know if you've seen them, Kanthan. That the U.S. government's not even articulated. I talked about, when Trump sanctioned the ICC, South Africa, in the midst of all this, joined with 83 other countries to lodge a complaint against the U.S. For what? You're just pissing in the wind. That complaint's not going to go anywhere. Why would you commit an own goal like that when your relationship's already on the rocks? Just let it go. And this ICJ case, and you keep making a big stink about that. Why do you keep pouring energy into that? You didn't join Myanmar case with Gambia, the groundbreaking genocide case that took place in 2018, 2019. You never joined that. You say nothing about the Rohingya in Myanmar today. You say nothing about the genocide in Rwanda. In fact, you gave refuge and succor to genocideers in South Africa. You say nothing about the Uyghurs.
And you're not talking about what's going on in Sudan. That's an absolute disaster on this continent.
What happened in Tigray? With the Ethiopians under Abiy, the extermination, the murder, the execution of prisoners of war. We have the video of it. They tried to cover it up, but their own soldiers took the video. Look, there's been no accountability.
And the current situation in Syria is literally a genocide of Christians.
Well, they're Christians. We're not going to talk about that, But yeah, absolutely, And so these are own goals, But they can't seem to help themselves. I speculated, about a month ago. I started saying before anyone else was talking about this. Do they want this? Is this the intent? Do they want to play the victim? Is that the role that they're looking for here? Because they keep ratcheting up the stuff. The first good sign I've seen, and we'll see if they sustain it, is over the weekend with the statement from the presidency and then a few senior people talking to the press, if that's true, that, we can't support this Rasul thing. I think that your comment earlier that for the first time, Ramaphosa looked befuddled. We can't get away with this crap. This ice is getting kind of thin out here. Maybe they realize just what a hole they've dug here. And Trump has been unbelievably patient with this, mostly because he's got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, look, I think the interesting thing is that Ramaphosa right now is actually fighting on two fronts. On the one hand, his party is trying to get a budget passed. And look, props to the DA in this particular case. They've been digging in their heels. And I absolutely think that they should continue to do that because Ramaphosa has no choice other than to go with whatever they're saying. And it's actually an opportunity for the DA to get a better grip in terms of the financial structures of the country. And, ideally, I'd like a situation where they take over the finance ministry and, make that the single bargaining point. And if there's anything that's likely to clean up the mess, once you have control of the finance ministry and you're actually managing the flow that goes through to all of the other departments, that's the point at which the stuff is actually going to be stopping. And, we've seen very clearly how this has been happening across the pond. But so right now you've got Ramaphosa who's struggling to get a budget passed by his government, and he's losing dramatically on the international front just simply because of the fact that all of the people he thought are his allies now currently have a direct channel to Washington. And where does that effectively leave him? he's not able to do very simple things like take control of the city of Johannesburg. I've no doubt that he'd actually want a way to be able to avoid this disaster of losing the American consulate. And look, people don't understand the extent to which losing the American consulate is going to be an absolute disaster for this country. I've had conversations in the past with U.S. diplomatic corps, and the people who are actually at the lower levels, who are actually doing administrative stuff, who are aware of what's going on. South Africa, up until now, has enjoyed a very favorable relationship with the U.S. We only have a 5% rejection rate for visa applications.
Oh, that's going to go up.
Yeah. So the approval rating for South Africans getting U.S. visas has been, almost 95% consistently.
Which is almost a complete inverse of most of Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you suddenly have a situation where that's not there anymore, that's going to impact quite drastically on this country, because there's so much business that gets conducted by South Africans who are traveling to the U.S. because, it is the economic hub of the world. And all of that is now in danger as a direct result of the fact that Ramaphosa doesn't have control of his own party and he can't whip his guys into line.
Well, arguably, he's never had control of the party. I've argued that since 2018 when he took over at the ANC's conference. He won that election by 70 votes. 36 people vote the other way. It's NDZ who becomes the president of the ANC and by default the president of South Africa, in a very different outcome. And if you look at his cabinet from the beginning, a bunch of Zuma stalwarts were there from the very beginning. I don't think he's ever controlled this. He's been, in some ways, he may think he controls, but kind of a puppet up there has been my view. As far as the budget for South Africa, yeah, it's a huge issue. And major props to the Democratic Alliance and to Gate McKenzie's PA. Apparently, they're also pushing back on this budget. At least that's what we hear. But the bottom line here with the budget is that the DA finally put on his big boy pants and realized that they actually matter in this coalition. Instead of, fighting for consequential ministries, they got the things that were broken. I said they held all the cards last year, and they didn't negotiate that way. They didn't get any of the security cluster, not the police, not the military, not intelligence, not the justice sector, none of those important things, not foreign affairs, not finance. And, as you said, look at Doge. If you control the purse strings, you can control government and you can get under control and can sort things out pretty quickly. The DA should have gotten a finance ministry, just like Tende Mbiti in Zimbabwe for the MDC got the finance ministry and saved Zimbabwe from obliteration in 2009 in that so-called government of national unity there that was forced by SADC, which was the dumbest thing ever. Mugabe lost that election. Even though he stuffed the ballot boxes, he still lost the election. Everybody knew it, and he stayed in power. But the MDC took over the finance ministry with a competent economist and actually got the country saved. The DA, for their faults and their merits, have qualified people that can run the finance ministry and do it effectively as a leader. So they ought to get that in there. But here's something that most South Africans aren't aware of. They aren't paying attention. I report on this, and I've got legal opinions on this, and now today it's been reported again. The VAT increase is done and dusted. Apparently there was a change in law several years ago, and the mere mentioning by the Minister of Finance that that's in the budget puts it into effect. It doesn't matter what the vote is. They're going to have to pass legislation that rescinds it. You're going to get a 5% bump in a few weeks on April 1st in your VAT, whether you like it or not. Doesn't matter whether they agree to budget or not. That's pretty frightening. I mean, what kind of democracy is that a cabinet minister can decide what your tax rate is? I mean, apparently that's a done and dusted deal, and nobody's talking about this. I think people should be up in arms about it because they're going to be surprised to find out it's going to be, 16.5%, not 16% come April 1st.
You're kind of catching me flat-footed here because the first time that I'm hearing of this.
See, because the media are not talking about it.
So look, the point is that you can actually have the ministers passing regulations related to their spheres of competence. Whether that actually cuts across the board to tax increases, my understanding of the way in which this stuff is actually supposed to work is that they have to be included as part of a division of revenue bill that gets submitted to Parliament. So it doesn't matter what the finance minister says in the budget speech, unless the division of revenue bill actually gets passed. And, getting the bill passed actually will require this on behalf of, will actually require the DA actually vote as well. I really can't see this happening. So let me not contradict you at this point, but it doesn't smell right to me, and I'm going to have to go back. I'm going to have to go back and take a look at this.
It didn't smell right to me. So here we go, business day. And I reported on this last week because it missed everybody's notice. And I'm like, how could, and I asked the question. I didn't say emphatically there was true. I said, how can this possibly be true? Parliament up in arms over Gondwana's proposed VAT increase. A legal opinion suggests that there may be some hope of a reversal of the VAT increase later this year. This is coming in response to what I said previously. There is no hope of finance minister's imposition of a 0.5 percentage VAT increase in last week's budget speech not being imposed on May 1st, according to legal opinion. The question whether amendments to the fiscal framework and revenue proposals will prevent the increase of the rate of the VAT commencing on May 1st. I said April. It's May 1st. The answer is, in my opinion, negative, said the senior parliamentary legal advisor. They're moving forward. The government's moving forward implementing this VAT increase. And they mentioned the sections of the code here, Section 7, subparagraph 4 of the VAT Act. Yeah. So anyway, this kind of caught me by surprise too. And no one in South Africa is talking about this. I mean, first off, if it's not true, then the press should be rubbishing it. They should be getting experts out there saying, this isn't true. This is panicking. People are telling you something's not true. I don't know why it's not being talked about.
But the press don't have people who have the capacity to think about this. And then who are the experts that they're going to call? Because they actually don't have these experts.
Fair enough. See, that's why because the media are watching my content. That's why they're so befuddled with me. They can't figure out how this white dude in Appalachia is not a extreme right wing racist. Actually understands South Africa, knows more about it than they do. It throws them off. They're so confused. And how could somebody possibly know about macroeconomics, culture, language, history, political science? How could you possibly know all that stuff? Dairy farming, macadamia nuts. Well, that's because I've lived a life, brother. I've lived a life.
Yeah, it's what we do, Chris. It's what we do.
Exactly. I mean, look. They when they come after you, which has happened on occasion, they pigeonhole you into this one thing. I mean, you were an incredibly accomplished person who's done. Look, I'm not trying to toot your horn and pat your ego there, but you're an incredibly accomplished person, an entrepreneur, an IT guy, a guy that's been a seed capital guy for businesses. You've sparked so many things, and they pigeonhole you because they don't know how to deal with. I don't know. I don't want to call ourselves savants or pat ourselves on the chest, but I mean we don't fit in a little pigeonhole that they like to create for people.
Well, it's like Pete Hegseth is a talk show host, right? He's not actually the first real soldier to be stepping into that particular position.
Yeah, it's all he's ever done. Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's died down here though. You notice that because we've had several of the Fox personalities wind up in the Trump administration, and they got tired of going after that. So once Hegseth got in, they couldn't stop it anymore. Also, notice all the attacks. He's not fit. He's not mature. He's a drunk. He's a womanizer. That's all gone. These are just political attacks, which always come. People should always ask yourself when they attack a candidate or someone that's in office over their character. Is it real, or is it simply to get rid of them? In Hegseth's case, it appears to have gotten rid of him because there are very few complaints about what he's doing as Secretary of Defense now by even the political left. They're not even focused on what he's doing.
Well, certainly from the recruitment figures that I've been seeing in terms of the U.S. military, it's way up there. If you have a look at the state of the South African Army right now, remember in 1994, South African Defense Force was rated by Jane's Defense Weekly as the 6th most powerful in the world. In the world.
Yep.
Okay. And now what are we? Like Zimbabwe could probably march across the border and invade us and we'd be toast.
I really, I should do a documentary called Race to the Bottom. That's what ANC governance has been, race to the bottom and everything. 30% expectations for subjects to get through the matric. This destruction of the infrastructure. Your ports are the worst in the world. Not by me, rated by the international organization that does that, rates ports the worst in the world. And people are like, oh, but the Cape Sea lanes are so strategically important. Well, it might be strategically important, but all it takes is a U.S. carrier group floating off the South African coast to keep them open. We don't even need a carrier group. Just one battleship or one cruiser could do that, or one guided missile frigate could do that. So that's all it takes. So it's not that important. And oh, by the way, if it's so important, why are none of these ships stopping in Durban, Port Elizabeth, Cape Town? Because your ports are abysmal. They take forever to get out of.
There's no space. If you stand up, if you go to Durban and you stand up on Umhlanga Ridge and look out across the bay at the massive line of ships that are waiting for a berth.
Yeah.
and they sit out there for 2 days waiting to actually get in.
Driving up the cost of the goods and services that are coming in. And, so I saw this phenomenon when I was in Liberia. So my apartment looked out over the West Atlantic from the end of the Mamba Point. There's a peninsula there. And that's the entry point to go into the free port of Monrovia. And I would see on the weekends when I come up, we have a sundowner, get the cigars out, kick back with the ambassador, have a little scotch or whatever. It's the only time I ever did that in my life, but it was kind of cool. We'd hang out. It was a tradition he started with previous defense guys. So we'd sit there and we'd look out, and I'm looking at like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, a dozen ships out there waiting because there was only one berth available because one was damaged by mortar rounds, another was occupied by the Mercy ships providing free medical service, and there was only one channel to get in, so only one ship at a time to get in there. So these ships sit out there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And as a consequence, a case of Coca-Cola canned in Algeria, which should have cost $6, winds up costing $18 at the store because they got to pay for the fuel, for the salaries, for the insurance, the operating costs for that ship to sit there idle doing nothing for 6 or 8, 10 days. And the same thing in South Africa. Why would you stop there and wait? Wasting money. Time is money. Margins are slim for many shipping companies. You don't have that kind of time. So South Africa's strategic advantage has been squandered away in the race to the bottom. That's what everything has been with the ANC, the race to the bottom.
And it makes you wonder what the end game is going to be. And I'm really having difficulty wrapping my head around that. Because their default position seems to be you're in a hole, keep digging.
Yeah, when they're not just digging with shovels and spades, they got a backhoe in there. They got bobcats in there digging. I mean, it's one thing to dig your own grave. It's another to dig it in an expedited fashion, which is what seems to be going on. But I mean, look, Kanthan, all is not lost. South Africa doesn't have to be this way. It just takes some tweaks and some good behavior, and it can all be turned around. The problem is there's no will. There seems to be no will. And the ANC still thinks that South Africa's domestic international policy is formed and regulated in Lutuli House. But that isn't how it can be now. It's a government national unity. You don't have 50 plus 1. Without 50 plus 1, you have to rely on other people. And the other partners in the GNU need to realize they're powerful, at least a couple of them anyway, and start using that power, IFP and the DA in particular.
Well, it certainly seems this time that the DA is actually flexing its muscles. And
on the budget.
On the budget, and it's a good entry point, and long may it last. And look, I'll say this much in the DA's favor, that the 3 contentious issues that were kind of railroaded by Ramaphosa, which is national health, expropriation without compensation, and the education bill, were all passed by the previous parliament when the ANC had a majority. And frankly, there's not much that the DA could have done to actually stop them other than doing stuff behind the scenes. And I think right now the situation is that with the urgency of getting the budget actually rubber stamped by Parliament, I think there's an opportunity here for the DA to actually be showing some real gains. And maybe they'll be able to reverse the declining support that they've been having. The DA are very fond of saying, no, social media is not where you judge us. I'm very clear that their internal polling is showing that they've actually been tanking with their core audiences. And I think that they need something right now that's actually going to show that they're still in this game. And I hope that they're actually going to prove me wrong and do something that's actually going to set us back on track.
Well, one thing that surprised me is I had Franz Kronig on here recently, and after that I had the gentleman who helps do the polls for the Social Research Foundation. And I had seen this poll. It was from an Afrikaans publication, so I just glanced at it and I saw the numbers, and I questioned it because in that poll it showed the ANC dropping, and this is voters, not likely voters, but people vote, from 40 to 32% since the election last year, and the DA gaining 3%, which I'm scratching my head on that one. This was after the Bella and EWC came out about a month ago. And then even MK dropping from 14 down to about 11%, 12%, 11%. And then the EFF dropping further, and then even the IFP dropping 1%. That doesn't surprise me. The only part that surprised me there is that the DA actually gaining votes, and I still, that one I'm scratching my head, but I'm not surprised. I mean, the support, and here's the thing, a lot of South Africans, a lot of white South Africans are like, well, things will never change. Black South Africans always vote for the ANC. No, they won't. They won't. I mean, look, the DA is 1/3 white, 1/3 colored, 1/3 black vote. That's where their support comes from. It's the only truly multiracial party out there from a broad-based perspective. And I'm not pimping for the DA. I'm just stating the facts. But black folks in South Africa have the same wants and desires, most of them, as everyone else, as Indians, as coloreds, as whites, for the most part. There are plenty of wackadoodles out there. They get all the air. They get all the attention. But if you go meet black South Africans, as many of us have, or know black South Africans, as many of us do, you'll see that most of these folks just want to raise their family. They want to worship whatever their faith is in the fashion they'd like, raise their kids in a safe environment, be successful. They're not running around looking for retribution or trying to confiscate land or demand this or demand that. And some of them are just frustrated. They just want a job. Now, some of that plays out in abusive behavior, but most people aren't like that. And I think that the polls, if they're accurate, are probably a reflection of that. People have had enough of the ANC for sure. We've known that for some time. But this rise of the MK, they've done nothing. And the party is in constant chaos and flux. And so I think they're losing a little. That's probably their true losing support. The EFF is a dying breed. Malema has lost the plot a long time ago, and now people are finally realizing that. So I think that that these polls are accurate and people are hungry for something else. Now, what that translates into an election, that's a whole different ball of wax. We'll have to wait for municipal elections if South Africa survives that long. But anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Did you see that poll from the Social Research Foundation? And what are your comments if you saw it?
Yeah, no, I skimmed over it, and again, the numbers that one is actually polling are not enough to actually be substantial, and so I end up kind of saying, yeah, but
taking it with a grain of salt. Yeah,
take it with a grain of salt. I mean, to the point around people saying that MK has actually been tanking. MK pulled off a fairly spectacular victory in a by-election last week, which was in Richmond, which is the heart of ANC territory. And, one of the most contentious areas in the history of KwaZulu-Natal was the scene of massacres on the parts of warlords fighting in that part of the world. And I wrote about it more than 20 years ago. There was a man named Sifiso Nkabinde who was expelled from the ANC during Mandela's time, and Mandela refused to divulge what was going on. And then Kabinde was arrested, and the killings in Richmond stopped. And then you had a judge who ordered his release, and guess what?
The killing started again.
The killing started again until Kabinde was assassinated, and suddenly a peace of sorts descended upon Richmond. And this is exactly the place that Jacob Zuma has now taken control of. So, what I'm trying to say is that a number of people in KZN, who are nominally these people who are wearing suits, but they are effectively warlords. And they are warlords in the sense that they actually have impies under their command, who will actually do their bidding. And anything that one looks at with regard to KZN always has to keep that at the back of our minds. KZN is not going to be determined by the people who live in Durban and Pietermaritzburg. It's going to be determined by all of those rural areas. And the fact is that in spite of all of the negative coverage from the mainstream media, and again, I urge people at this level, you don't trust the mainstream media to report correctly on what's going on in terms of farm murders. You don't trust them to report correctly in terms of what's going on in terms of the US, but suddenly you trust them with their reporting on Zuma. No, actually, you should be as skeptical of everything that they are saying. And I'm not in any way thinking that Zuma is currently losing support. If anything, I think that he's got a very sustained campaign behind the scenes that is actually consolidating a power base, and he's keeping his powder dry.
Well, I don't disagree with that in the context of KZN, and we have seen a little traction in by-elections in Gauteng as well for MK, which that would be a strong indicator if they're going to do well. But I think the real indicator is, can they be beyond KZN? There's a by-election in Saldanha Bay tomorrow. and MK has a candidate. Let's see how they do. I don't expect them to win, but if they get more than 2 or 3%, I think that's an encouraging sign for MK. That's a long way from their power base on the other side of the country, and it's a place where Gate McKenzie should have fertile ground, and the Patriotic Alliance ought to do well tomorrow. We'll see if that happens, but this is where an ANC councillor died. It's been a traditionally strong place, Saldanha Bay, unfortunately for the ANC, but I don't think the ANC is going to do very well tomorrow. We'll see how the DA does and how PA does. If MK can get a few percent there, that might show that there's some interest, because it's a long way from their power base. But they've got to go beyond. They've got to go beyond.
Yeah,
KZN.
but consider this: that MK's presence there could very much be at the level of actually wanting to damage the ANC stranglehold in that part of the world.
Sure, I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying they've just got to get beyond KZN. If they get beyond KZN, then you can take them as seriously. I mean, the Inkatha Freedom Party was a big party that was harmed badly by the events leading up to '94 and then the election. And rather than a national party, it wound up becoming essentially a regional party for the most part, limited to KZN and to a lesser extent to Gauteng, where it's died out a lot. And that's been unfortunate for South Africa, I would argue.
So take this view that Jacob Zuma doesn't necessarily have his eyes set on other parts of the country. I strongly suspect that if he ends up effectively wresting control of KZN, he'll be very happy with that.
Well, I don't disagree at all. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Western Cape secession. How about KZN secession?
You're speaking exactly the correct language, because one of the reasons why I'm keen on Jacob Zuma actually succeeding in KZN, rather than this ragtag coalition that has been pulled together right now to run that province, is that if you then end up with a strongly Zulu nationalistic power base in KZN, and you have an equally strong quest for greater autonomy for the Western Cape, the pressure to then implement a true federal solution in South Africa is going to increase quite drastically. Right now, no matter how many people you have in support of Cape independence, it's never going to get off the ground. But if you're now able to establish these power bases, and there's good reason why we should be establishing these power bases, because historically, these are the points around which people used to coalesce in these areas. So the Eastern Cape historically has always been Xhosa, and and KZN by the same token has always been Zulu. And to my mind, I'm very happy to actually encourage this coming together, because then you're actually going to end up building a sense of coherence in each of these provinces. Right now, it's kind of a free for all.
Yeah.
I mean, really, what do the DA and the IFP and the Freedom Front Plus and all of these guys bring to bear in terms of a cultural fit together?
What do they have in common? Nothing, except they don't want the ANC in charge.
Exactly. And I'd be perfectly happy, for example, if you had the likes of an ACDP, which was suddenly establishing a stronghold in one of the province based on a strong Christian framework. I think that would actually work very well. So all of these are tying in with shifts that are happening in many parts of the world. And I think that, at that level, let's not write off Jacob Zuma. Let's just take the view that I have this instinct that he's looking to establish effectively a consolidated power for AmaZulu and KZN. And I'd be very happy with that, because I think that with that will actually come stability, will come structure. Remember that this is a province that actually deeply respects traditional structures, far more so than other parts of the country.
Yeah, very conservative.
And the fact is that those structures actually bring with them a sense of law and order.
Yeah, look, I was kind of caught off guard. I mean, my prediction for MK in KwaZulu-Natal was 35%, and I thought people thought I was crazy, but I was wrong. It was 45%. So I didn't know that the ANC was going to crater that much, and some of the voters simply stay home. But I don't know that I'm in the same boat, cheering on, hoping MK does well in KZN. But I understand your point. It's a valid point. Before we wrap up, let me come back to something I think we need to address, and this comes back to the ANC and the government not being able to read the room. They're not reading the room. President Trump's executive order talked about, people being discriminated against in business, education, and other aspects of life based on their skin pigmentation and based on the fact, well, he didn't even say that, but, I've got the executive order, but it says, here, let me read exactly what it says in the executive order. But the executive order says that countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity, it doesn't say for whom, in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence. So that's a pretty blanket statement there. It doesn't say anything about white farmers. It doesn't say anything about farmers. It does say Afrikaners in the purpose of who's, but it doesn't define Afrikaners. Afrikaners in South Africa who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. Well, my definition of an Afrikaner is different than many Afrikaners. I include some Indians, many coloreds in that group or culture aligned with that community. But, it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what South Africans think. It matters what the State Department defines to be whoever that group is. But the point of this story is that it wasn't simply about that. That was the thing that led this off. But this executive order goes quickly into how South Africa has taken aggressive positions towards the United States and its allies. That's a second complaint. The third complaint is the Israel and not attacking Hamas over the ICG case. That's the third one. But then the most important one, and now the ICG case is getting a lot of attention. Initially, the South African government was tone deaf. They ignored it. Oh, it's the white. There are no farm murders. No, dude, nobody mentioned farm murders. That's not even in here. Get over yourself. That's not what it's about. So that's what they focused on, and Trump misunderstood. He's uninformed. That's the first part. Then they finally latched on. If you have, well, wait a second, they're talking about, this is all about Israel. Oh, it's because they love the Jews. But they still, no one is paying attention to the most important, egregious position in here, and that is reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and nuclear arrangements. Nobody is talking about that in South African government, probably because it's true, and they're afraid they don't want to highlight that. The press doesn't want to highlight that that's a major sticking point for the U.S. There is no way that the U.S. government, even under Biden, would allow, well, maybe under Biden, but under Trump, never going to allow nuclear power or nuclear weapons in Iran. And if South Africa is cooperating at any level with Iran in that field, that's a problem, and no one wants to talk about it. So my argument and my question back to you, Kanthan, is that why can they not read the room? Am I correct in my assumption? Do you think that maybe it's true and they just don't want to talk about it and want to brush it aside? And why the academia, why the media, and why the government ignores that this is about insulting America? This is about all the things that have been done to America from the American perspective. Whether it's true or not, it's our perspective. And you have to at least respect the fact that we have a perspective and talk to us about it. But when Ruben Brigidi and the U.S. Embassy went to the South African government for 5 months asking for answers about why the Lady R docked in Cape Town at Simonstown base, we were rebuffed, we were ignored, we were disrespected, and finally he went to the press and then, oh, that's not what diplomats do. No, diplomats approach you quietly, and we did that, and you ignored us in your arrogance. So what are your thoughts on all of that? That's quite a bit.
Look, frankly, I don't think for a second that South Africa is involved in Iran's nuclear program. And for the very simple reason that all of the smart people who used to work in South Africa's nuclear program
are in France and Japan.
They're no longer here. I mean, and don't get me wrong, we have lots of very smart people in terms of the nuclear field in South Africa. You're probably familiar with Professor Kelvin Kem as an example. Brilliant guy, highly clued up. Certainly one of the strongest advocates for us getting nuclear power plants into this country. But is the ANC in a position to actually be cooperating with the Iranians in terms of their nuclear project? No, I don't think so at all. My kind of unpopular take on this is that Iran actually already has a bomb. And I say it on the basis because I know what's necessary to actually make a bomb. And, there were, seismic readings that showed underground explosions taking place in Iran during the Biden era, which, corresponded very clearly in terms of the, the signature that would be left by an underground detonation, admittedly a small scale. Does that mean that Iran has enough to actually ramp up on capacity, to be able to enrich sufficient uranium to be able to produce, more than one or two of these weapons? I think no. And more to the point, is Iran likely to actually be letting anyone have even the slightest hint that this is the case? Because, I frankly, if I was sitting in Israel and discovered that Iran had access to a nuclear weapon, there'd be a preemptive strike. So this entire thing right now is going to be played out not at the level of the nuclear weapons as such, but in terms of who has the most to lose. And I'm very clear: Iran has the most to lose in the event of the U.S. getting incredibly pissed off at them, and effectively turning a blind eye if Israel decides to drop nukes on Iran. Because there's no one else who's actually going to have the capacity to respond. But having said that, I also think that if I was in Trump's position, it's exactly the card that I would pay, because it then puts the onus on Ramaphosa to step up and say, "Hey guys, actually no, we're not doing this at all." In fact, our nuclear program was shuttered prior to South Africa actually attaining freedom. And we've been very clear that we're not going back into the nuclear weapons space. Hell, we can't even keep our one nuclear reactor in this country running properly.
That's exactly the point I'm trying to make here. I mean, the smart money would have been say, "Hey, listen, we've noted the United States says we're doing this with Iran. We're not doing that. I mean, we can't even keep the lights on in Kuberg. We're not involved with Iran in that." So, the fact that they ignore that, raises question. That doesn't make it true or not, but it makes people scratch their head. But I mean, back to the point, is the government not reading the room? I don't think they're reading the room. They're playing to a domestic audience. They're not understanding what's at stake here. And maybe they are now.
Yes. Yeah. Look, as always, never attribute to malice what is best explained by incompetence.
Yep.
And it really comes down to that. We have people in our government who are incredibly stupid. Think back to Kamala Harris's word salad around what artificial intelligence was all about. Where she was sitting there and saying, AI is actually two words. It's artificial intelligence. It's like you're speaking to a 5-year-old. And that's the South African government. They have ceremonies for unveiling toilets, and to suggest for a second
they have for pit latrines. They cut ribbons for that.
Oh goodness, yeah.
Other people cut ribbons for building power plants and soccer stadiums, but they do it for cutting pit latrines. Unbelievable.
Yeah, but it's kind of like going back to remember at the time at which they tried to deploy the military to assist with the 2021 riots.
Yeah, they didn't have any food, so they had to get in the front of the line at the ShopRites that weren't burned. They jumped the queue. Yeah, they didn't have any rations. And then the police ran out of live bullets in the first 6 hours of what was going on. It took private, rich South Africans on their own private planes to fly ammunition in to KZN. Look.
Exactly. To suggest even for a second that we have the capacity to be able to assist Iran in their nuclear program, no. Not at all. Yeah.
Well, I'm not arguing with you. That's why I'm saying the silence is deafening. I'd be like, "Hey, dude, no, you're looking in the wrong. We're not doing that. No.
But can you imagine our president actually admitting that we are too stupid to do stuff like that?
No, but anyway, but yeah, look, it's Kanthan. It's incredibly frustrating because the breach in the relationship is generated. Look, there's fault on the U.S. side, no doubt, but it's generated almost entirely by the South African side. I mean, I ran through that list of all the different things. I'm not going to go through it now. And these are just things that I came up with in recent history. It's not things that go back 20 and 30 years. It's all in the past couple of years. And the genesis of this current crisis that we're dealing with from a South African perspective that we're dealing with right now is February 6th of 2024. Trump was fighting for his life in courts, whether he was going to have his freedom, whether he was ever going to run for office. Remember the Secretary of State for Maine and Colorado tried to take him off the ballot illegally and just unilaterally, I'm the Secretary of State, so he's not on the ballot. You can't do that. Anyway, so that's what was going on with Trump in February of 2024 when Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives proposed a resolution to become a bill to be signed into law that would force Congress and force the executive branch to relook the relationship with South Africa with an eye towards removing them from AGOA and punishing South Africa for its egregious offenses against the United States, and included very clearly in the language of that bill was none other than the Lady Pandor, her telephone call congratulating Hamas, yada, 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 yada. All of that. That was under Biden. And the only reason that never saw the light of day is because the Democrats control the Senate, and Schumer would never allow to vote on that. And Biden did didn't sign it. Although we could have got the auto pen. I suppose the auto pen could have signed it. Look, by the way, just some advice. If you know anybody in South Africa is looking for security detail, I know 18 unemployed guys at Blaubergstrand right now. They're just hanging out at the Kopstadt Brauerei. They have nothing else to do.
You're talking about the Hunter Biden's entourage.
Yeah, it says his detail. Yeah. So I was asked this morning by Chris Sten on Business News about that. And I said, well, she said, what's the impact? I said, well, I mean, if I was Hunter, not having 18 people staring at me on the beach might be a nice break, not having all those people hang around.
It'll be fairly simple to find Hunter Biden in the Western Cape, though, because the trail in terms of the crack houses is well documented. Lots of us know where to find them, and don't worry, we'll be able to find him.
Hookers and blow, baby, hookers and blow. Oh my goodness! Oh, that's so mean, Kanthan. So mean. You just don't understand. He's a recovering addict. Be nicer. Anyway, yeah, no, Hunter Biden. What a convicted felon. Convicted felon with a Secret Service detail. Can you imagine? That's insane. Nobody wants to kill. The only people who want to kill Hunter Biden are the creditors, the drug dealers he owes money to. Nobody else wants to kill that guy. Anyway, but yeah, he's in South Africa. Look. I mean, things are so bad, Kanthan, now that South Africa doesn't even have to do anything to offend America, and they're still on the watch list. Did you hear Trump last night? He got called because he was asked about that. He says, "Oh, he's where in South Africa? Well, South Africa is on a watch list." I'm like, "Oh, watch list? Oh my God." Watch list is a phrase associated with terror organizations. We don't usually, I don't, Trump is just using it colloquially. What he means is they're on our radar. But when he said watch list, whoa, I mean, the government did nothing to get on Trump's radar. But because Hunter Biden was vacationing in Cape Town, oh my goodness, South Africa just can't win. They need a reset. Maybe they need to send Tony Leon to D.C. and not an ANC stalwart. That might help.
Well, sending Tony Leon is only going to help if Tony Leon has the ability to actually influence the course of South Africa's government. I think a good point to wrap up on is something that I've said over the years, Chris, which is good things come to an end, bad things have to be stopped.
Yeah, you're right.
And what we have right now are bad things in South Africa, and they need to be stopped. And, every bit of pressure that happens on the international front that's actually going to tip us in the direction of being a meritocracy. Because trust me, if we have a meritocracy in this country, we'll be the best damn country in the world. Absolutely.
Well, I don't know about that. You can be second, but you're not going to be best. But I agree with you. I agree with your sentiment there. That look, it's
well, we gave you guys the world's smartest man because he couldn't do it in South Africa because it's not a meritocracy.
Well, that's true. If it had been a meritocracy and if you'd had freedom of speech instead of suppression of speech and a lot of things, then things could have gone very differently. If you hadn't chased away not all, but a lot of the talented, well-qualified black, white, and brown labor to New Zealand, Australia, Canary Wharf in England, places like that, Canada, South Africa would be a much stronger country. But those people can come back if, stop the bleeding. And a lot of those people may come back to South Africa. Not all of them, but some. Anyway, yeah, Kanthan, that's a great point to wrap it up here. Iconic with Kanthan and Chris. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you don't know who Kanthan is, his links are below the video. Go check it out. Before you go, you're still doing the Overton podcast, right?
Yeah, so John and I have that off-the-record conversation every 2 weeks where, we shoot the breeze pretty much like you and I are doing right now, but it's a lot less structured. We kind of go all over the place, and it's a lot of fun.
This was structured?
But, just also a heads up to the audience. On the 17th of May, I'll be doing a book signing and a meet and greet at Nicklin in right here in Sandton at Nicklin Shopping Center. It's a Saturday afternoon, so if you guys want to come along and just shoot the breeze and maybe have a glass of wine, this should be a lot of fun.
All right, 17th of May. Mark your calendars, folks. Cool.
Yeah, but I'll put out invites on social media at some point around that. But it should be fun.
All right, cool beans. Kanthan Pillay, thank you so much, sir. As always, Ke Alaboa, bye-bye donkey, and have a pleasant evening. And don't take any wooden nickels because they don't work in those slot machines.
Cheers.
All right, folks, that's Kanthan Pillay. I'll drop off and I'll take care of the super chats that people gave here on this broadcast. Okay. All right, so let me just go through the super chats very quickly. We got another Neanderthal upgrade membership to Master and Commander. Thank you for that, man. Sweet. Appreciate that. JR, thank you for your membership. Then we got Nathan Small. Thank you for your membership, which I think is a renewal because you've got the Moai from the Easter Island there. New Nick gave a 14 Rand super chat. Thanks for all the hard work. You're welcome. Guns Uncensored said Rasul has openly supported the likes of Yassine and Kwadwai. His ties to the Muslim Brotherhood are open to. This isn't going to be tolerated. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for the 70 Rand for that. Helen Bothma gave her first super chat, a 14 Rand super chat. Thank you for that, Helen. By the way, for the 3 super chats. 1, 2, 3. And then also we've got Philip van Niekerk says, why is the MK so militant? Because it works for them. 40 Rand. Thank you for that one. Because it works. That's why they do it. And then Lutki at the end, 70 Rand. Hunter is besties with Ramaphosa. Maybe. I don't know. But he's certainly a guy that's got himself on the radar screen for the United States of America. No doubt about that. So Hunter's detail has been pulled. All right, folks. Yeah, Artie Cates that bell. Folks, I'll be live with the news here in about 28 minutes, so you can join us over there. Didn't realize that I would run this long. I thought we'd do about an hour, but Kanthan and I had a good conversation here, so appreciate you being here. I'm going to set this up so you get redirected to that so you don't have to change your browser, and you can hang around, but we'll take a short break here. I've got a video to record. I don't know if there's enough time to do it. Oh, Jan says, just received mail from handover details 67,000 South Africans to U.S. Embassy in Pretoria. Neil Diamond will be on Newsroom. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. Wow. Thank you for that. 67,000 names. And by the way, the South African Chamber of Commerce is getting a lot of abuse. People say you can't trust them. You know what they're all about, yada, yada, yada. Well, I mean, imagine if they had just been left alone and people hadn't rubbished them because they didn't like Neil Diamond, how many more names they would have gotten, because South Africans just simply don't trust things. That would have been fascinating. So regardless, 67,042 names representing how many people? 67,000 names. And let's assume a spouse and 2 kids on average. Some are single, but let's just go with that. 4, because some families are larger, some are small, but let's go 4. 4 times that, we're talking 280,000 people that have already expressed interest just to the South African Chamber of Commerce. I know that on my channel 2 weeks ago, over 40,000 people at one point or another expressed interest on this channel. They could have been the same people. We don't know. Wow, that is huge. That's going to be big. So I know you're all going to abandon me for that for 7:30, but maybe I'll be done by then. We can all go watch it together. That's crazy. Wow, something else. All right, folks, thanks once again to Kanthan for this segment. If you're not familiar with the segment, it's called Iconic with Kanthan and Chris. It all stemmed from my trip last year when I asked a friend in South Africa who knows him very well, said, hey, can you link me up? Because Kanthan and I appeared on Big Daddy Liberty's chats, and we didn't always agree on everything. And I like to actually chat with people who don't agree with me on everything, because otherwise you're just you're drinking from the same Kool-Aid, so it's nice. But our worldview is pretty much the same, but there are points we differ on and nuances, and that's great. Bring different angles to it. So I talked to someone. They gave me his contact, and I went by and I met him at his place of business, and we sat down, we talked, and we had a lekker conversation, and I suggested that we do this segment, and he agreed. And we've done it infrequently, but we've done it twice now in the last month because of all these consequential events. But it's called Iconic with Kanthan and Chris. There's actually a playlist on the channel. You just have to look for it. Just search for Iconic on my channel. All right. Okay, what else? We're going to have to wrap it up here, folks. I'll see you guys on the next stream. Oh, Jan Fundrio, I sent you everything about it on your WhatsApp. Okay, thank you very much for that, Jan. I'll check it out. And this is going to make Arctic's ears ring. All right. Okay, guys, we'll see you shortly. Thanks for being here. And again, my thanks to Kanthan. Always a pleasure. Great to have these conversations, and I think they're just awesome. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll see you in a few minutes. Cheers, everybody.